Hello, you silly geese. It is I, Lily, and welcome to a full build guide at last for my mana stacking Thorns Infernalist. This has been, by my standards, a hotly anticipated build. I know many of you have seen my first concept video before the leak and the update video I've made since then. There have been even more changes to the build since that update video, but I think I finally figured everything out, and I am confident enough in this build and believe enough in this build to actually make a full guide video and recommend this build. It was my league starter. I thought it was a very fun league starter. It was budget friendly. I've made a lot of progression. I made it to T15 maps on basically the same gear as I started T1 maps on, because this build is extremely league start friendly. It's not going to be the best end game bosser, but it is going to clear T15 maps reasonably. It can be pushed past where I've taken it, and I think if you're starting a late league start or looking for a second build because your first one was disappointing, or just want to try something fun and off meta, especially with minimal screen clutter, then this is the build for you. It has 2-button gameplay. It basically doesn't clutter your screen up at all, and it's a very simple build to understand, and I've had a great time with it. Now, this build is a Thorns build, and I do feel like Thorns is the most misunderstood archetype in the whole of Path of Exile. Maybe in ARPGs as a whole, you generally have this concept where the people who know something about Thorns are like, oh, you just get hit and things die. That's such a brain-dead build. That's so boring. That's not fun. While it is simple and doesn't require extreme mental capacity, it's very fun, and it's not just stand there and things die. Now, for those who don't know anything, Thorns is a stat that, as I say, is stand there and things die. It's a stat that you can get on body armors, shields, and belts, and various other locations from unique items that gives you damage that you deal to enemies when they hit you with a melee attack. Now, that is specifically with a melee attack, so that can be kind of a little bit sucky, but there is an item that solves that, and that is the Crown of the Pale King. While this is not the best item in the game, it is completely essential to any Thorns build because it allows Thorns to retaliate against all hits, which means that the only things that Thorns doesn't retaliate against is non-hits, things like ignites or poison ground. You don't retaliate those, but those are a very small portion of the game. There is only one enemy that I know of that we cannot proc Thorns on at all, and that is the Drowning Hags. Everyone hates them, but they're also only in maybe like 1 in 20 maps, so it's not a big deal, and you can still kill them through the other tech that Thorns use. The other tech that Thorns use is Barbs and Quill Burst. These are 2 support gems that make it so that when you are hit and you retaliate with Thorns, your next few attacks will apply your Thorns damage on the attack. This doesn't technically count as an attack or a hit, so it doesn't scale with sources of attack or hit damage, but it still lets you apply Thorns damage with hits. Barbs applies single target Thorns damage, and Quill Burst applies AoE around the target that you're targeting. These support gems are an essential part of pretty much any Thorns build. Now, the way we apply them is you basically just want the fastest possible strike skill, because that is a requirement of Barbs, that it has to be a strike skill, and for that we like Rapid Assault. Rapid Assault just does really fast damage, so this turns into a spear build. Something else that's important to Thorns is an ability called Scavenge Plating. This is a spirit skill, and you gain stacks for breaking enemies' armor, and for each stack you get increased armor, but more importantly, flat Thorns. This gives a lot of flat Thorns, more than you can get on basically any rare gear. It is a very strong source of Thorns, and you are generally going to want to support it with anything that can give it more levels, because it's just very good. Now, speaking of support, you can also support it with Thorn Skin for up to 70% increased Thorns damage for even better scaling. And to get the broken armor, most physical Thorns players will run Warbringer, but we aren't running Warbringer, more on that later, so we use Resonating Shield, which we can slot Quill Burst into to get a decent amount of AoE damage as well, but at high levels, Resonating Shield can break almost any enemy's armor in about 3 procs, which takes a second and a half, and then you have your Scavenge Plating buff up for about 10 to 15 seconds, depending on levels and support gems and stuff, but it's just generally a very competent gameplay loop. Now, that is the general idea of Thorns as a whole. You can see other videos on my channel, or check out Kalturak on YouTube for more of an idea of things you can do with Thorns, but now more specifically on this build, we are a mana stacking Thorns build. Now, early in the league, I wanted to make that based on Crackling Barrier. It turns out Crackling Barrier just sucks complete ass, so we just don't even use that at all in this build. Instead, we are using the newly buffed Ice Tomb. Ice Tomb was changed in 0.3. I don't remember what it did before, but what it does now is it has the text gain cold thorns damage equal to 15 to 18% of your maximum mana. This can be corrupted up to 22% of your maximum mana, and this is why we are a mana stacker. This means that mana is damage for us, this means that we want as much mana as possible, and this means that we can take Mind Over Matter as an extra health pool, making this not just a high damage build, but also a very tanky build. Now the big trouble with Mind Over Matter is that it gives you 50% less mana recovery rate. This applies to basically everything and just cuts all your mana recovery completely in half, but we can use Mana Remnants to regain insane amounts of mana. In my testing, Mana Remnants is basically all you need for recovery, but we do have a few extra layers as well. We use Arcane Surge, we use Sources of Increased Recovery, and we use Midnight Braid for 50% of damage taken recouped as mana, as well as recoup on the tree as well. So we are actually able to regain mana pretty well and negate the downside of Mind Over Matter, which is usually scary to most people. Another thing worth noting about Ice Tomb is Ice Tomb deals cold damage. Now we are Thorns build, that means we want to get hit, and frozen enemies don't hit, so that is also a downside in this build that we have to manage, but it's actually a very easily manageable downside because all you actually need to do is convert your cold damage to other types of damage. Now there are 3 options to do that, and that is Avatar of Fire, Whisper of the Brotherhood, and Original Sin. Now Original Sin in this version of the build is a complete meme and not even worth considering, although I have something interesting to look at with that in future videos, but don't look at it until I've explained further. Whisper of the Brotherhood converts elemental damage to lightning, but you will still be doing a lot of physical damage, which makes it difficult to have unified scaling. And then the final thing is Avatar of Fire. Avatar of Fire converts all of your damage to fire damage, meaning you will only ever be doing fire damage, meaning you can purely just scale fire damage, which is pretty great. Dealing fire damage also allows us to completely negate other downsides that I will cover later to do with our ascendancy. So in general, Avatar of Fire is just the best way to manage the fact that Ice Tomb does cold damage, because again, cold damage is just really bad because frozen enemies don't attack us. Now that is how Ice Tomb works for us. That's a core part of our build. The next core part of our build is that we are an Infernalist. Now, why Infernalist? Well, the big and obvious and glaring part of it is the node Bedat's Gaze, which reserves 25% of a life to get 1 maximum mana per 6 maximum life. In theory, this can give us up to 700 total mana, which is an absolutely insane, unhinged amount of mana, and it also allows us to keep life while doing the rest of this build, so it just makes the build very comfortable, and that is the #1 driving force of why we picked Infernalist. Another driving force for picking Infernalist, though, is Grinning Immolation, which gives us 50% more critical damage bonus. More, not increased, so this actually works out to an insane difference in critical damage bonus, and makes us one of the highest crit multiplier Thorns builds, and it really provides a massive gain to damage. It's very nice. Grinning Immolation does, however, have a downside of become ignited when you deal a critical hit, taking 15% of your maximum life in energy shield as fire damage per second. Before the league, I thought we were going to manage that with dowsing charms. That turned out to be a bad idea. Everyone who tried that had a kind of bad time with it, but with 0.3 we got a new amazing way to manage that, which is another reason that we take Avatar of Fire, and that is reduced ignite magnitude nodes. There are 2 nodes, there's Self-Immolation and Flame Walker, that together with the travel nodes that get you towards these nodes give you 100% reduced magnitude of ignite on you, allowing you to still ignite enemies, but you yourself take 0 damage. You can be ignited, but you take 0 damage, which makes the build a million times comfier. This also allows us to take things like Molten Carapace, which give us benefits to being ignited, such as 2% maximum fire resistance, 50% increased fire damage, and 50% increased armor, as well as 1% of maximum life regenerated per second for very few points. So that is again leaning into that Avatar of Fire because it's more fire damage, which is good for us, and it's very nice. And this actually means that we don't want a dowsing charm because it just reduces our damage. A lot of people have asked me, why aren't we using Bira's Anguish? This is why. We do more damage being ignited than Bira's Anguish Burning Ground does for us. Aside from the fact that Burning Ground is just kind of trash in this game, but that's a different conversation entirely. Now from what you can see in the background of the video right now, this is a general idea of how our build looks. Our pathing does change a few times during leveling, so make sure if you are leveling a new character with this that you keep gold around for respecs. By the way, if you are doing that, you can only switch to Thorns from level 16 at the earliest. I have in the notes of the path of building more of a rundown of switching over. I recommend leveling with Essence, Strain, and Contagion. If you are leveling a new character, you can check out Dead Rabbit's build for that. Again, linked in the notes of the path of building. But this is an idea of what our end game tree looks like. The important things to note is, first off, Mind Over Matter is a massive source of health pool for us, so you have to take that basically as early as possible. Eldritch Battery is also a nice source of increased damage, and it also does serve as increased defenses because it is really hard for us to get energy shield back, but with Mana Remnants we can get mana back basically immediately. What's also very important, although I have mentioned this before and you kind of want this before your second ascension, is self-immolation. Being able to have reduced ignite magnitude on you allows you to exist doing the crits you want to do, so that's quite an important thing to take. Speaking of crit, thanks to the unique Briar Patch, the Heart of the Will, and the passive skill Thornhide, it is actually very easy for us to get to 100% crit chance, hence why that crit multi is very nice for us. So Thornhide is another important node to take to get your crit chance as high as possible. It's also worth remembering that you can get stag talismans in your helmet for even more crit chance, and this means that you barely have to invest in crit chance on the tree at all to get 100% crit chance, so crit multi is just free damage for us. Obviously also important is Avatar of Fire. This is our whole vector of scaling damage through fire damage and unifying all of our damage and preventing enemies from getting frozen, so this is very important. Another good source of increased damage is Retaliation. It gives us 75% increased Thorns damage. It says if you've blocked recently, you are always going to have blocked recently. If you are doing this right, you should have about a 35% block chance without too much investment required for passive block, but then you're also using Resonating Shield regularly to break enemy armor, so that will always mean that you have blocked recently unless you do something horribly wrong. We also take Barbaric Strength. It's the only crit multi that's in reasonable distance of the rest of the points that we're putting in here, and it also gives us some strength as a little bonus. That's extra life. It also gives us crit chance pathing on the way there. There are other sources of crit bonus that we can use, but they're just a little bit too expensive point wise for us to take. Then we are doing fire damage, so gain 8% of damage as extra fire damage is just free damage, and penetrating enemy fire resistances is again just free damage. That makes our life a little bit easier. We can also get some increased elemental damage that can also come with increased crit chance, which again just makes the build more comfortable. 40% increased elemental damage if you've dealt critical hit recently. Remember, every hit is a crit for us because we have 100% crit chance, and then we can get some resistances and increased elemental damage from all natural as well. So in general, our crit and our elemental skills are where most of our damage is coming from. Now, of course, we are using mana as a second health pool, so adverse growth for more recoup is quite important. Arcane Surge is also quite important. It's a big source of mana regen for us. We also really have to take these small nodes here. Speaking of using regen for survival, Arcane Blossom, not as good as it sounds, but is still a very good source of recovery. A worry a lot of people have with Thorns is that the clear might be bad. That's actually just not even a real problem. Resonating Shield with Quill Burst does a lot of AoE damage, and Quill Burst and Rapid Assault also does a lot of AoE damage, but to get even more AoE damage and a better wide clear, and what honestly allows me to delete entire clumps, even in abysses, in basically one Rapid Assault cycle, is Explosive Impact, which gives burning enemies a 5% chance to explode, dealing a 10th of their maximum life as fire damage. That can delete packs of enemies on top of Quill Burst, which just makes things much more comfortable for our build in general. Now, an obvious place a lot of people's brains would go seeing all of this is Herald of Ash. Unfortunately, I'm not fully sure how Herald of Ash interacts with Thorns. It's very difficult to test. I'm not sure if we're getting proper high numbers of overkill damage because I don't feel like we're getting big ignites on enemies. However, we do get ignites on enemies, which gives them that chance to explode on death, which is very useful for our damage. But more importantly, because we're using mana remnants for recovery, critical hitting an enemy that is ignited has a chance to give us a mana remnant, so having a Herald of Ash just actually gives us quite a lot of recovery. Now at this point we are using a lot of spirit and it can be difficult to fit in the thorn skins, so you do need to know how to actually get that spirit. And I would say the biggest thing that makes a difference to our spirit, obviously you can get spirit on an amulet, but is the new abyssal roll that you can get on spears, which is up to 10% increased spirit reservation efficiency of skills. This makes it a lot easier for us to fit thorn skin and Herald of Ash onto our build, and it is very useful. And also we can can deterministically craft our spear to basically always have that modifier, so that makes Spirit a lot easier to manage. However, the spear can be a little bit too expensive for early game progression, and at that point I recommend just not having Herald of Ash. Unfortunately, as useful as it is for our build, 30 Spirit is a big cost, and we do want Thorn Skin and Scavenge Plating quite importantly. While we're taking a look at gear, other than the spearcraft, which is deterministic and I'll get into later, the most important things on any piece of gear for any build is always gonna be your elemental resistances. Our build is no exception to that. I do plan to try out a build later in the league that is actually an exception to that, but in general, when you're playing Path of Exile, you want to be resist capped. This build is not an exception, so your first priority is always going to be resistances. However, once your resistances are solved, from then your first priority is actually mana and life, because that is damage and defense for you, and it's kind of just fucking huge. Beyond that, you can check in the pub. I have progression loadouts, and those progression loadouts give you a fully detailed rundown of your stat priorities on rare gear throughout your progression in the game, so take a look at that. Important uniques are also probably a good thing for me to cover. Obviously, we have the Crown of the Pale King. I mentioned that earlier in the video. I'm mentioning it again now. If you do not have a Crown of the Pale King, you will do no damage, because very few enemies hit with melee attacks, and that just reduces your damage massively because of that. So you need Crown of the Pale King to be able to reflect against all hits and to trigger barbs and quill burst. It is so important. One thing worth noting with the Crown of the Pale King is that it is worth trying to get either an exceptional one or corrupting into 2 sockets, because of the fact that we can get these stag runes, which give us 100% increased Thorns critical hit chance. Those are extremely useful, so when you have an extra divine, make sure you get a 2-socket Crown of the Pale King. But before you have that extra divine, a Crown of the Pale King is 1 exalt. Buy it. The barrier to entry to this build is not expensive at all. Our second most important unique you might think is Ice Tomb, but it's actually not. It is Briar Patch. It gives 25% to Thorns critical hit chance. This is huge for our damage. Like I said, we are crit based. It's also a big part of our ascendancy as getting more crit damage, and if any other build could get 25% base critical hit chance from a unique piece of equipment, they would take it. With corruptions, Briar Patch can even be 30.5% Thorns critical hit chance, which along with the Heart of the Well unique jewel and the Thornhide passive on the tree can make us get 100% crit chance with only the 2 stag runes required on top of that. So it is very easy for us to reach 100% crit chance and makes Briar Patch a complete no-brainer. From there we get to finally our third priority unique, and this is Ice Tomb. It can give you cold thorns damage equal to up to 22% of your maximum mana. This is with corruptions, but this is a huge amount of damage, and it very quickly outscales what a rare piece of armor can give you. I believe you need a little over 1,000 mana, very achievable, for Ice Tomb to give you more thorns damage than a rare armor does. Not counting armor stacking shenanigans, which are kind of insane at the moment, but a completely different build. You can check out Kulturak for that if you want to try out an armor stacker instead of a mana stacker. Either way, it's a Thorns build. This is my version. I fucking love it. It's great. Our next priority unique is the Heart of the Well, and the only thing we care about here is the Thorns critical hit chance. Like I said earlier, this allows us to very quickly and easily get to 100% crit chance. Now, a Thorns crit chance Heart of the Well is going for about a divine at the moment. Those prices will probably drop, but also you don't need this unique while you're leveling. It could just be a good use of your first divine though. Next up, and this is kind of important to get early, but it is also only 1 exalt, even with a good corruption, is Midnight Braid. This gives you 50% of damage taken recouped as mana. This basically just means that no matter how big of a hit you take, you can always use your abilities because you aren't out of mana. So that is just very useful for making the build a lot more comfortable. It does lose us some thorns damage because your rare belt is a source of thorns. It can give you up to 220 physical thorns damage, so losing out on that sucks a little bit, but Midnight Braid is just so good for recovery. In a super endgame version of the build, you could consider swapping Midnight Braid for a rare belt. I haven't done that, but you could look at that if you want a slight variation on the build. Another option that you could consider if you choose to forgo Midnight Braid, which I actually only realized while editing this video, so editing Lily here, hi, is Coward's Legacy, which allows you to counters on low life while at 75% of maximum life or below instead of the default 35%. We are permanently below 50% of our maximum life, 75% if you've only ascended 3 times, and this allows us to pick up Pain Attunement, and Pain Attunement gives us 30% more critical damage bonus while on low life. This is more, not increased, so it actually works out to a lot more than 30% critical damage bonus. When I simulated updated in Path of Building, it added about 99% to critical damage bonus. However, I do believe the in-game numbers will be closer to about 70%, but it's also, let's say, 60 to 90% critical damage bonus is something that I think most builds would consider a no-brainer for 1 point and a unique belt. However, dropping Midnight Braid is risky. It is a massive source of defense for any mana-based build, so do this at your own risk. I'm gonna try it out, but only after this video is out, so I'm not recommending this, but if you want to try something different, this is an option. And the last unique you care about is Urukali's Gift. We do want to be immune to poison because poison can bypass Mind Over Matter, and that kind of sucks. But on top of that, Urukali's Gift can give us mana recovery based on our flask when it's used, which is again just a nice source of recovery. It's not going to trigger a lot because not every enemy poisons, but when it does trigger, it is just going to make the build feel a little bit more comfortable because of it automatically applying your mana flask. Have a good mana flask because of that as well. That's a good idea. Otherwise, on charms, I've found that a staunching charm is important because bleed just eats through your mana in no time, and a grounding charm is important because if you are shocked, suddenly there are a lot more one-shots in the game, so not getting one shot is nice. Earlier in the guide, I said I would talk you through crafting a spear. Now, ideally, Editing Lily will have put in a clip of me crafting my spear for this. I was going to do it right now while recording this segment because that would have been great and made my life easy. Unfortunately, my internet has gone down, so I can't actually play the game. So I'm basically just going to read off the pub notes here. You can read off the pub notes for yourself because that's probably easier than listening to a video to know how to craft. But I'm still going to talk about it here so that you can get an idea of just how easy it is. Now you start with the option of either buying or crafting a blue base. Unfortunately, not a lot of blue bases exist on the market, at least at time of recording this video, so I do think it is better to buy a white base and craft it up to a blue base. Trade links are included in the pub, but you want to get a superior spear with at most 71 dexterity required. The lower dexterity required, the better, because we do not scale off of the actual damage dealt by the spear at all, so we'd rather just reduce the amount of dexterity we get. But the sea glass seems to be the most available at higher enough item levels to get what we want. Now, speaking of what we want, I have calculated that we are most likely to get it with a greater transmute, although it can be at lower tiers, or we can get it with a perfect transmute and actually get it at higher tiers. We want attack speed, dexterity, strength, or levels to melee skills. All of these things are greatly helpful to our build, but we can also take reduced attribute requirements as a settlement because this essentially functions as a lower tier increase in dexterity because it means we need less dexterity to actually equip our spear, so it is actually for once finally a helpful role. These are all suffixes. We actually don't really care about prefixes on our crafted spear at all. I recommend just filling the blue base if you get a perfect suffix on the first go though, because that saves you an exalt later in the process. Now this is where you need to be careful to not regal this item because we are going to use an essence as a regal here. We're either going to use the greater essence of haste, or if you got attack speed as your suffix on your blue base, we'll then be using the greater essence of the infinite to get attributes. There is no bad attributes. If we get dexterity, cool, that lets us get more intelligence on the tree. If we get strength, cool, that lets us get more intelligence on our tree. If we get intelligence, cool, we were going to get that on our tree anyway. So any attributes are useful to us from that essence of the infinite. You will now have a 3 mod rare spear. From here, we want to desecrate. You want to use the Omen of Dextral Necromancy to guarantee that you get a suffix from your desecration because it is very important that we get a suffix. And then you want to use the Omen of the Liege to guarantee an Amanamu suffix because there is a very specific one we want, and that is the Spirit Reservation Efficiency. So using the Omen of the Liege gives you a 1 in 3 chance to get that. Now you can use the Omen of Echoes to re-roll to get a higher chance of getting the Spirit Reservation Efficiency. This is, however, kind of expensive. I would recommend using it if you can afford it, but if you can't afford it, there are other settle rolls that we can get from our desecration, so it's really not a big deal if you can't afford an Omen of Echoes, but ideally we want that Spirit Reservation Efficiency so that we can get Herald of Ash. Now at this point you should have a 4 mod spear with 3 useful mods. All the useful ones are suffixes. We're in a great spot. Finally, we want to exalt until our prefixes are full. It truly doesn't matter what we get here because there is nothing that we can hit on an exalted orb that actually helps our build. However, at this point we can perfect Essence of Flames because once the item is full, that will only ever remove a prefix and replace it with a prefix, and a very useful prefix, which is up to 20% of your damage as extra fire damage. This is just 20% more damage. This is very good. This will increase your damage hugely and make the build feel a lot stronger. And again, it's deterministic. You can't miss on this. It can only replace a prefix, and there is no other useful prefix in the game on a spear that we can get. So this is perfect. Now, the final step, and maybe not everyone's going to want to do this, but I do recommend it, is using an Omen of Corruption and Varling the spear. There's a 33% chance that we get a 3-socket spear. This would be the best case scenario. We could also get a Corrupted Implicit. This will just make us stronger for no downsides, so that's perfect. And the third option, and this is where it becomes risky, is we can re-roll up to 3 modifiers on the item. Now, if it takes any of our 2 useless prefixes, that's okay, we're fine. However, if it takes our attributes, if it takes our desecrated mod, if it takes our essence mod or our attack speed, then we're in a little bit rougher of a spot. But you can just start crafting over from the beginning again, and again, it's a 1 in 3 chance that it bricks in this way. And even if it does brick in this way, I don't know the exact odds, but it is not a 100% always you get a dead item if it bricks in this way. However, you will eventually want a 3-socket spear anyway, because we can use these skill speed runes to make our resonating shield faster for faster armor break. But you can just craft more of these spears. I think the whole crafting process, last I looked at it, costs about 1 divine, more if you use the Omen of Echoes. But I mean, what build wouldn't love to get its perfect endgame weapon for less than 10 divines? It's a part of what makes this build so amazing and honestly really cheap. It's very nice. Another important thing that I almost forgot to include, but is the most common mistake that I see people making with any Thorns build, but especially this build because attributes are so important to us: do not level your Rapid Assault. All you get by raising the level of Rapid Assault is an increased mana or life cost and increased attribute requirements. Now, if you do get the +4 to melee skills on your spear, that will increase the level of your Rapid Assault, however, not by enough to actually cause a problem to the build. It's the most common mistake I see made with Thorns builds. Do not level up Rapid Assault. Do level up all of your Spirit Gems. Do level up Resonating Shield, but do not level up Rapid Assault. You will fuck yourself over and you will have to just buy a new level 5 gem to fix things from there. Now, the second last thing that I want to cover in this video is how to ascend. Earlier on the day of recording this video, I completed my 4th ascension in Trials of the Sekhema as a melee build. A lot of people think that is impossible. All of those people have a skill issue. Especially with Thorns, we have one easy trick to actually make Sekhemas, in my opinion, easier than the Trials of Chaos, and that is block. It does slow us down a lot, but we can just basically always hold down Resonating Shield, managing your stamina as much as you need to never take damage and therefore never take honor damage. When enemies attack us and hit our shield, they die. We don't take damage. You do have to then take Trials of the Sekhema very, very, very slowly because you're managing your stamina build up and you move slower while holding up your shield, but this does allow you to complete the Sekhemas basically for free with a melee build. When I did my 3rd ascension also in the Sekhemas, I almost did it hitless. Trials of the Sekhemas is actually easy with a melee build if you know what you're doing. You can see in the background footage right now me killing Zarok. I mean, I did lose a lot of my honor, but because I was playing badly and rushing through it because I wanted to record this video as soon as possible, it's actually really easy. I put it off because I hate the Trials of Sekhemas, but it's really easy if you just block. If you need more advice on how to pass the Trials of the Sekhema, I will probably make a dedicated video on that at some point. In the meantime, Kalturak has made a dedicated video on that every league so far, so you can go check out his advice. Those videos are going to be good, and Kalturak also does have good Thorns builds, so check him out. Now, finally, the last thing that I want to end this video off with is that I am not done with 0.3. I have more that I still want to do. However, I will probably be moving away from the mana stacking Thorns Infernalist after this because I think that I have pushed this build basically as far as it can go, except for one little thing which you can look for in an upcoming video. I want to try out a different ascendancy. You can check my Discord for spoilers of how I plan to do that. You can watch my streams to see how I do that, and I also do have other very fun build ideas that I would love to try out at some point. Square cocks, anyone? But for now, this is where I'm going to end this video off. I look forward to seeing all of you in my comments, in my Discord, in my streams, and trying out the build in general, so therefore on PoE.ninja, because I bet you can have a fun enough time to level this character up a ton, because it has been a dream leveling this. I've had a great time, and I can't wait to do future stuff. Thank you all for watching. Remember to click like, remember to click subscribe. If you want to know more, remember to join the Discord. I answer basically every question anyone asks me. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thank you all for watching. This has been a wonderful league. This has been the best league I've ever had in Path of Exile, and it's all thanks to the support that I have been receiving from you. So thank you very much. Goodbye.